Man by Calder Willingham. I went on a gay reading binge the summer after I graduated from college, when I stayed in town to work as a projectionist. The audiovisual department was in the library basement. Between screenings, I returned to the stacks upstairs, no longer looking for books about love, but books about sex. I suddenly needed to imagine sex with a man in all its lurid details so I could want it badly enough to risk asking for it. The few bits of porn I encountered were badly written absurdities with too many food metaphors. I wanted sex scenes that were literary yet graphic, mixing skin and emotions, obscene acts, and good prose. I read all the usual suspects. I recognized that A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood was a fine novel, but I wanted a good fuck scene. The drunken nude swim was too much like the fantasies I already had. The City and the Pillar by Gore Vidal had some hot sex between two teenagers in its opening pages, but went downhill from there. After years of longing, Jim, the protagonist, finally meets up again with his beloved, only to find the guy is straight. So he kills him. This was in the original 1948 edition. In his 1965 revision, Vidal relented and Jim merely rapes the poor guy. This was not the erotic drama I wanted for myself. The Calder Willingham novel wasn't what I wanted either. Dark sado-homo doings in a Southern military academy. My Freudian memory insists on misremembering the title as Enter a Man. Yet the book gave me something else. The margins of the library copy, an original edition from 1947, were full of notes penciled by a previous reader, a running argument with the text. Oh, please. Or, you got to be joking. On the page where the villain finally tells the remarkably obtuse hero, I am a practicing homosexual, my predecessor had written, Oh, Calder, how shocking. I couldn't guess how old his comments were, but I was tickled to learn that other gay men had read these books. And the comments were not merely skeptical, but mocking, scornful. Just because something was in print didn't mean that we should believe it. I now saw that I could be part of a we. Number 13, Surprising Myself by Christopher Bram. Yes, this is my own novel, a book that I wrote. But if reading is often misreading, rewriting if you will, writing can be a deeper, more active form of reading. In the words of E.M. Forster's Old Lady, how can I know what I think until I see what I say? And that was true of my novel. I worked on it for 7 years, producing 3 drafts of a book nearly twice as long as the one I finally published in 1987. I'd written an earlier novel, a straight story, that I was never able to sell. Since this one might go unpublished too, I decided to write what I really wanted to write, which meant writing about homosexuality. But I knew gay life was a hard sell, and I worked out a narrative strategy. My narrator, Joel Schertzenlieb, is a neoconservative twit who doesn't become fully human until he comes out. The idea was that even straight readers would want him to accept his homosexuality, as if there'd be any straight readers, or that anyone would stick with Joel for 300 pages before he became human. These are the pages that I later cut. You start a book with a clear purpose and preconceptions, then find your story taking you places you hadn't intended. The novel was never consciously autobiographical. Joel wasn't me. My parents were still married. I'd never been a Republican. He was a bland yet promising type of boy I used to fall in love with, like an American Hans Castorp from Magic Mountain. And yet sometime during the writing, Joel became me. Or maybe I became him. A year into the first draft, I met my boyfriend Draper, who's nothing like Hans Castorp. God bless him. Requited Love changed my story from a half-hearted comedy about coming out to a more rueful, complex comedy about living in a couple. The slipperiness of domestic love, the kind of love that Joel's lover Corey calls, after Lawrence Stern, not just an emotion, but a situation. Their situation leaves them open to other lives. Joel's quasi-hippie mother on a farm in Virginia, his sister lies in her bad marriage to an army officer, his flaky father who quits the CIA to become an actor. I gave the book a wild mix solely for dramatic reasons, to keep things lively. Putting together this list of books, however, I see that the mix was not just about storytelling, but about the kind of life that I'd learned to want through my reading. A gay life, but one that connects to other lives, as it does in Martin Duberman and Jane Rule. And a conscious life, one that does not repress the dark erotics of Terry Andrews, but where the deep interior space of Proust can occasionally be escaped in requited love. That's a lot to load on a first novel, and might be why Surprising Myself is so messy. I've written better books since. But by writing it, I was able to finish what Mann and Proust and the other books began, coming up with my own answers to the questions they'd raise. They were only temporary answers, of course, but those are the best kind. Thank you.
Well, why don't I start by asking about the title story, Mapping the Territory, which is sort of a companion piece to what you just read. It's basically the introduction to Robert Giard's book, Particular Voices, and it's a survey of contemporary gay literature. And I think it happens to be one of the best surveys of gay literature I've ever read. And the first time I read it, I was amazed by your breadth of reading. It's as if nothing escaped you. But one of the things you say in that essay is you talk about how the gay community was once the community of the book. And I just wanted to know, what did that look like at that time? What exactly was the community of the book?
It was... Well, it was the world of bookstores. I mean, one of the things that's kind of fascinating about the development of gay politics and gay culture was how much of it was kind of book-driven in the beginning. In The Advocate magazine, when in its first issues, it would have authors on the cover. Nobody else would come out. It didn't, and even fashion designers and give me somebody who since is more, even fashion people would not come out, but writers would. So early on, writers were willing to stick their neck out. I think then gay bookstores were just a major force. There are gay bookstores in every city. There's still many around, but they were a real kind of revolutionary effect. And those were kind of like writers in the magazines and gay bookstores were just a real driving force. I mean, movies wouldn't touch the subject for the longest time. It would kind of sneak out. TV wouldn't touch it for decades, right. and now it does. But it really was. We were a community of the book, or a community of many books.
Well, one of the things you say in here too, I think that's interesting, is this essay is also autobiographical, and you make the point that you see parts of yourself in Jane Rule that's missing in John Rechy. And I just wondered, for example, how does lesbian literature inform you as a writer and you as a reader?
Well, when I first started writing, I mean, some of my favorite... the gay male books tended to be dark and very dramatic, and kind of, it was the... and then I wanted the gentler, warmer, more friendly stories, and I found I would get those from the women, Jane Rule in particular. I mean, in the essay I just read, I talk about an amazing short story she wrote called Middle Children, which is really quite beautiful and very simple, and it's about this lesbian couple. They come together very easily and happily, and then they kind of feel that they want more. They want to connect with the rest of the world, and they find ways to do that. I mean, it's almost like a parable. It works so simply. One of the first books I remember reading, Lisa Alfer's Kinflix. And I think that was actually one of the models for Surprising Myself. I wanted that type of book where you could mix family and same-sex love and just kind of toss it all together. So the women were doing it in the 60s and 70s, I think, a little ahead of the men. The men caught up with them later.
Okay. One of the really interesting things about this particular essay is you break gay literature into about 12 categories, and one of them is, for example, Gothic literature, and you name Capote and Purdy, and you talk about the avant-garde, and it's everyone from Burroughs to Dennis Cooper, and there's something called the emotional realism, which is everyone from James Baldwin to Michael Cunningham to Scott Heim. And I wondered, within this whole big framework of categories, and your point is that too often we break out gay and lesbian writers into generations, and that generations in some ways are kind of meaningless, that there are things that unite people over the decades. And I just wondered where you see your own work fitting in this paradigm.
Oh, it was